Now recognizes the ranking member for opening statement. I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Distinguished gentlelady from California, Mary Bono.
Gentlelady is recognized. Chair now recognizes the lady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to introduce Congresswoman Mary Bono, former U.S. Representative for California's Inland Empire and Desert Region from 1998 to 2013.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Welcome to Sagely Speaking. I'm your host, Mary Bono, and I'm so happy you're here. On this podcast, I hope to bring you insightful conversations with a variety of guests from all walks of life, people with stories, wisdom, and perspectives that inspire and inform. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe. And if you feel inspired, leave a 5-star rating. It helps us reach more listeners like you. Now let's dive into today's conversation. Hello and welcome to this episode of Sagely Speaking. I'm glad you're here. And I have a very fascinating guest, and I think I'd put this guest in the category of just pure badass for what she does. We are going to introduce Lisa, but Lisa is not her name, and Lisa will stay off camera, and this is in order to protect her identity and to protect the work that she does, which is very serious and danger undercover work. And let's bring in Lisa. Thank you for joining us on Sagely Speaking.
Good morning or afternoon.
Or whatever it may be whenever people are listening to this. Lisa, thank you so much. I mean, you really are somebody who inspires me, if that's the proper word, but you do very dangerous work. So rather than my telling folks what you do, other than you are the lead investigator for Shepherd's Watch Foundation. So can you go ahead and fill us in a little bit on what you do with the Shepherd's Watch?
Well, Shepherd's Watch is made up of 3 different areas within the organization. We have an intelligence group that works with an intel team, and we basically eliminate and target networks. So we bring down sex trafficking rings versus focusing just on one individual or just being working on victim resources or being just victim-centered. We work on taking the ring down by working as informants with law enforcement. We also have a legislative task force that is working on legislation because, quite frankly, you can do a lot in this venue, but if you're not working towards changing legislation or implementing legislation, you're really hindering the process. We've got a lot of bills right now. I think we have 10 or 11 right now that are being looked at. And then we also have an operations side, and so they do a lot of the education based on the work that we do. Now, we don't really educate the public on other people's platforms or speak to their work. We only can speak from our perspective. To give you an example, here in Texas, we have a huge issue with migrant trafficking. That might be different than another state in the U.S., but here, over 90% of our cases are migrant trafficking cases. So we don't educate people on what somebody would see maybe in Utah. We can only educate you on what we see here and what our experience is.
Well, again, so this is human trafficking. It's a very serious problem. It's very complicated, complex. I do think it's nationwide. I'm sure of it. But before we go into the human trafficking side, what it is, what's happening, and what is facilitating it all, can I ask you a couple of personal questions?
Sure.
Thank you. So how did you get into this? I understand your background is not law enforcement, or it's not, it was sort of more of a corporate America type of job from what I understand. How did you decide to get into this, becoming an informant, really trying to take down these trafficking rings?
Well, I am not law enforcement, and I'm not ex-military. I'm actually an ex-engineer. I was working as an engineer in telecommunications and started doing cell forensics for investigative companies, and over the time period realized how much I was seeing on cell phones that had to do with human trafficking, sex trafficking, child exploitation, and then basically using my skill set into the intelligence world, we realized that there was a huge gap in assisting law enforcement with being able to put together cases and fairly quickly that dealt with the intelligence side of the trafficking world. When most people work on trafficking cases, they're usually concentrating on the girl behind the strip joint or the girl in the ad. The only way that you can make a huge disruption is to take the entire ring down. And you must understand that for every ring that we see, we've got 30 right behind that. So you have to be able to move quickly. And we were able to use our skill sets and put together some amazing relationships. And right now we're averaging probably, I just turned in a ring of 20 on Friday to the Houston area, and then this morning we have another one in Dallas. So these rings are going to average anywhere between 10 all the way up to 58 girls per ring. So that's kind of what we do, and it wasn't really something that you just woke up one day and said, hey, I want to go work trafficking. It happens organically, and it's not for everybody. It really isn't. It's, if you're really working cases on the street with law enforcement, then you have to understand you're looking at the devil in the face. It's hardcore, especially when you're dealing with people that are not considered to be missing. It's nobody's child. They're not making NCMEC, which is National Centers for Missing and Exploited Children. They may not have a digital footprint because when they crossed the border, they didn't go through Border Patrol. And the atrocities that happen to these individuals it's just something that it's hard to sleep at night sometimes, even no matter how seasoned you are. So that's how I kind of got into it. It slipped in. And then finding other people that had the same skills and the same passion and were basically unshakable for the most part. That was a feat in its own right. And we developed a group of great people, great individuals. I can't say enough about this team. They are amazing. They've every day shown me that, true heroes are everyday people. And they are, by the way. I mean, we're talking about people that work in the travel industry, real estate agents, wealth managers, accountants, just amazing group of people that have used their skill sets to help us do the detail on the cases to hand over to law enforcement, because you're going to have money laundering, narco trafficking. It could be arms deals. It could be child trafficking, aggravated promotion of prostitution. And these are the people that help put those cases together.
Boy, there's so much to ask you. Why is a nonprofit necessary? Why can't law enforcement and the Border Patrol handle all of this? I'm not trying to ask a leading question because I know, but please, what gaps do you fill, and how important, is the war? Obviously, it's very important, but how is important, given that law enforcement should do it, the Border Patrol should do it, but here, ordinary people have to, take up this role and fill these gaps. What?
Well, I don't think that it's a lack of law enforcement initiative. I mean, we need to realize that in Texas you have an open border, and unfortunately, Border Patrol ended up overrun. You had state police officers that were going down there doing the job of the feds and having to back up Border Patrol. So you had guys that might be 10 cases in deep that are having to drop their what's on their desk, what they have to work on to go down to the border. And, you have some areas that actually wanted to defund the police, some of those guys are out of Travis County. So when you're looking at a border state that is being overrun, and, the criminal element here is unbelievable. When you have a 90% uptick in trafficking, these guys don't have the same resources that narcotics do. And that's one of the things that we're trying to get started and implement and change, so that they can seize assets like they do narcotics and rebuild these human trafficking divisions, grow them out so that they're staffed and they have, plenty of people to work. When I'm telling you, for every case that we have 30 in deep, I'm not lying. I can keep you guys busy nonstop. If I have more casework than I have officers to work it. What we do for them is not something that they cannot do per se. I don't want to say that. We might have a better intelligence package than some very low budgeted departments, but that's not their fault. That would come down to a budgeting issue. But what we do is we close the gap for them. And once we hand the ball off to them, then they're able to build their case at their speed with their tools, and then they can move forward. So Why is it necessary? Well, why it's necessary is because we had an open border that created a huge issue that was already an issue. We were already behind in legislation and funding, opening the border just threw gasoline on it. So, the answer to that question is that we have some amazing officers. What we're doing is we're just trying to support them and what they need and closing the gap for information and moving very quickly. We have the ability to do that. And so I think that that's where it's at. I mean, there's a lot of education and awareness groups out there. We don't need any more of those. I'm not trying to be rude. What we need is people out in the field helping law enforcement do their job, because those are the true heroes right now.
It is phenomenal, and it's not without great risk. Have you ever been terrified in some of your operations?
Oh, hands down, absolutely. You're not dealing with your run-of-the-mill pimps like you were back, 20 years ago. These rings are, 90% plus are run by organized crime. I'd say almost all of them. You're dealing with some very nasty and dangerous individuals. That invisible line in the sand did not change the way that they operate or their cruelty or the dangerous tactics that they have. These guys are not stupid either. I mean, that's the fallacy that most people have painted in their head because it's something that they've heard in a educational seminar or somebody that doesn't work the street. When you're dealing at the level that we're dealing with, think of this from a drone's perspective down. These rescue operations that law enforcement are having to put together are very intense, and they have to have everything buttoned down. These guys have counterintelligence. They move quickly. There's a paradigm shift in the way that they traffic, probably on an average every 3 to 6 months. They change tactics, and they're very dangerous. And yeah, I've been face to face with a trafficker through the breezeway of an apartment complex. I was there gathering some intelligence information and just so happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And we went shoulder to shoulder. It was very close. But, there's always a risk of them finding out who you are because we work as informants. We're not here for the glory. If you're here for glory, you're doing the wrong thing. We're not. We're part for the mission, not for the attributes and the glory. But if you're really out there working it is dangerous, and you don't want them to know who you are.
No, I can imagine not. First of all, when we talk about human trafficking, can we define this a little bit? And it's predominantly girls. And how young or old are, what is the age group of these women who are being trafficked? And there are some boys as well, but it's mostly women, correct?
Yeah, it's mostly women. I mean, we saw a large uptick in boys and men in men trafficked too. Transgender trafficking when the border opened. Those numbers also went through the roof. Mostly it's women. I'd say average range of what we see picked up in these rings is going to average between the ages of 12 all the way up to late teens, early 20s. When you start talking about the, say, ad platform world, you're not going to see a lot of the minors out there anymore. We used to see them a lot more in ads, but then they got smart and they started enveloping them into the rings. So it's a little bit more difficult than it used to be. I know people talk about, they're all out there on the dark web. Most of the trafficking that goes on is right there on the regular internet. You're going to see it anywhere from TikTok, Facebook, garage sale ads to sex platforms.
It's astounding. The lengths that these bad guys will go to, and whether it's narco trafficking or human trafficking, these transnational criminal organizations, as you've said, they're not stupid. They're very sophisticated. And by the way, they will find whatever the next greatest way of exploiting the human being, is their currency. So really, you brought up technology, these platforms. So it's a two-way street, I would assume, right? Where you can find these guys using those platforms, but you can find the trafficked people, but then people like you can also find the bad guys. How complicated is that?
It's not. I can't go into too much detail, but I will tell you this. So when we start filtering out and parsing out the data, we know who all the players are.
Wow.
Right. So we're able to identify all the players. And a lot of times, it's just passing the ball off. I try to explain this to people because it's football season. Shepherd's Watch, we're quarterbacks and we have a great arm. What we need are running backs to get it to the goalposts. I really don't care who you play for. Just get it to the goalpost, make the touchdown. That's going to save victims, especially if there's kids involved. So right now, depending upon what department, law enforcement department you're dealing with, there's different criteria for what they need. You might have a very well put together department that just needs very little intel on the front end from us, and then we pass off that information, and then they develop the case, and they're good to go. You might have a department that needs a little bit more information, a little bit more developed out case, and we might work it a little bit more to give them more information to go on, just to close the time period for them. So it just depends on, what department you're dealing with as to how much information that they need. But, I will say this on the technology side. I think the biggest piece of information that's it's misguiding is to think that these guys don't have the same advantages that we do. So for every, piece of intelligence or software application that you have, they also can replicate. They also can get their hands on. They're very sophisticated. They're changing the ball game on us all the time. And, that's the other thing too, is because if you're not watching that ball, and you've got other things going on, other casework going on, you might not see that change coming through. And we're able to tell the people that we're working with, hey, just so that they changed this dynamic. And, it just gives them a heads up.
It's always cat and mouse, right? We'll continue with our interview in a moment, but first I'd like to thank my sponsors. Lucy Pet Foods is the leader in gut health. Their formulas for life feature prebiotic, balanced fiber that nourishes your dog and cat's total health. Every purchase helps support the Lucy Pet Foundation, a 501c3 charity helping animals. Save 15% off your first order and use the promo code SAGELYSPEAKING, all one word, and you will get free shipping at lucypetfoods.com. If you're committed to tackling the opioid and addiction crises, then you need to be at the 2025 RX Summit. Use code SAGELY, that's SAGELY, for an extra $100 off. Join top experts and professionals as we share strategies for prevention, deflection, treatment, and recovery. Don't miss this chance to be part of the change. Head over to rx-summit.com to register now. That's rx-summit.com for an additional $100 off.
As the mom of two amazing kids, I know how important it is to keep our children safe. And that's why I talk to them about the dangers of drugs. It is not always an easy conversation, but it's essential. By talking openly, we can help our kids understand the risks, which will help them make smart choices. Create a safe place for our kids to ask questions and share their feelings. Together, we can empower them to just say no. Start the conversation today. Your kids' future depends on it. The greatest gift is a conversation.
And now, back to our interview. When these people are trafficked, is it always sex trafficking? Is it forced labor, or what are they being forced to do?
Well, there is labor trafficking. That's not our mission and not our focus. We focus on the sex trafficking only because the tool sets that we have are geared up to look at different pieces of information out there on the internet to put together cases pretty quickly. Yeah, there is labor trafficking, and that's very sad in its own right. And that's, children all the way up to adults. But you're going to have some sex trafficking / labor trafficking, if you can call it, it's not skilled labor. And that would be a lot of what you see in the IMBs, which is the illicit massage businesses, where people are basically coming over here and they're being forced to work in the massage industry, and they're basically hostages. So we see that a lot too.
So are these young recruits, let's call them, are they being recruited from their home country, or are they getting through the border and then there you go. Now they're just ripe targets for the traffickers to pick them up and exploit them? or both?
Well, yeah, I'm probably going to shock a lot of people by getting ready to say this. You have different flavors of trafficking. There's not just one type when it comes to sex trafficking, not just one way that they traffic. So you're going to have the Romanians are going to traffic different than the Ukrainians. They're going to traffic different than the Albanians, different than the Latinos, the Cubans, the Puerto Ricans, the Venezuelans, different than the domestics. So, and that would be African American, Caucasian, Asian domestic here in the U.S. There's different ways that they traffic. They use different programs. They do different platforms. There's different places, different techniques. But overall, what we've seen is that there's a large percentage of girls that come here from countries that are third world, where you're either a thief, a prostitute, or, a drug dealer, something of that nature. But if you're in a country and you are a prostitute and you are making, chump change, and then you come to the U.S. and hypothetically you can net in, 15, 30 grand a month, do you really see yourself as a victim? So that becomes difficult when you don't have a participating witness, a cooperating victim, because they see what they've been doing as elective. And at that point, you're going to have to make a case for aggravated promotion of prostitution. So it changes everything. It's not like the movies where you have them all chain handcuffed to the bed. There's a lot of women that will tell you that they're doing this willingly. So you have to approach that case differently. But yes, I mean, it is sad to say that there's women out there that look at this as, much better than in their, country of Cuba. That they're here, they're making good money, they're driving, $50,000-$60,000 cars, they're carrying Juicy Couture, they're going on vacation to Paris. So they don't see that as being victimized. And they look at us as though we're crazy that, we're not, pimping out our 18-year-old girls to follow in the same line of work. And that's very, very sad that they have accepted this line of work and this profession as life.
Well, that's very interesting. I can't imagine people willingly thinking this is a good deal. But, the border, do you think that now with the change of administration from Biden to Trump, that it's going to make this problem maybe not go away, obviously, but is it going to lessen the problem?
Gosh, I mean, you can close the border tomorrow, but I don't think that it's going to solve this issue. We have not seen a slowdown at all. I hope that there's a very aggressive move forward to close the border and to start attacking a lot of these groups and tearing them down. You're going to have to pick up the legislation part, though. I mean, right now you have district attorneys that would like to do something, but these guys have attorneys too. You pick them up on an arrest, they've got attorneys. If you don't have the legislation in place to keep them in jail, then that's going to be a problem. You're dealing with some countries that don't have a deportation schedule, such as, Cuba and Venezuela. So that makes problems thicker too. And when you look at, a large majority of your rings coming from countries that don't have a deportation schedule, that's an issue. Legislation has to catch up. So regardless of who is sitting in the presidency, we're going to have legislation to support what we need to get done. And I mean, I hope that and pray that happens. Now, that's certainly the goal here. I think that there's policy failures. I've heard this topic weaponized a lot, but I will say this: I've never known any predator or trafficker to traffic someone based upon who they voted for or who their parents voted for. So it's a bipartisan issue. They just need to come to terms that they need to work together.
I think that there's a sense, and this is true, I work a lot in the drug space, drug abuse prevention, certainly fentanyl trafficking, but there's always a sense with issues like this that this is not my problem. It's not happening in my community. It's somebody else's problem. Do you get the sense too with human trafficking to a large degree we have our heads in the sand?
Well, I blow people's minds when I let them, know that there's a trafficker in their neighborhood that's living in $1 million house that he paid cash for. and didn't use a title company to avoid detection so that he didn't have to money source. That's really hard to contemplate. When you live in a really nice community, that you have the monster living down the street that's trafficking, 14, 15-year-old girls. Most people don't want to believe that that's there, but they're all shapes and sizes. It's breaking the fallacy of the pimp behind the strip bar. And, the guys that are running these rings that are making this kind of money, they live everywhere. And honestly, I guess within the last year and a half, our biggest rings have been in bedroom communities in Central Texas and in North Texas. They've been in bedroom communities, $1 million neighborhoods. They're running out of retail sites that are in $1 million neighborhoods. It's not the crummy retail sites that you would just drive by and go, gosh, I bet the cops are out in front of this joint every night, because it looks like that type of place. But you're enveloped into these communities where nobody would suspect that it's going on. And we've got a few of those that are multi-agency right now, because they were just some of them. A couple of them were open for 5 years. Nobody ever picked up on it.
So until they're convicted, there's nothing you can do to register them as sex offenders or do public notice about these locations?
Well, I can't speak from a district attorney's point of view. From our point of view of what we see is the conviction will get them registered as offenders, which will help keep them away from schools and areas where children gravitate. But as far as offenders reoffending, it's very common. They're making way too much money to not.
Yeah, to not give up on it. So what legislation, and do you have on your website, or could you put on your website help that you need from folks on getting some legislation passed? And do you focus more on state or federal or both?
Well, this is it's a new horizon for us. And we realized that we became the echo chamber for law enforcement because they couldn't go to the legislators. They couldn't go to the media because at that point they become whistleblowers. So, all of the bills that we're proposing are based off cases that we've worked and the roadblocks that we had, in trying to get the things from point A to point B. It's everything from 17-year-olds to be considered minors in trafficking cases. It's that might be something that the feds consider, but it's not something that the state considers because the age of consent is 16. So you have that. You have, traffickers not having to register as offenders. We haven't put this out on our website yet. Once the bills are written, because they're in the process of being written, then we'll be able to do that. But what we are doing is we're working with people in the legal field and the legislative arena in other states, and we're sharing that information with them, kind of as a collaborative, and saying, hey, if you have any bills out there, take a look at this and let us know if you think that we need something added to this, or is this something that you guys could use? Would this be an answer to your prayers? Or, do you have something at the federal level? Do you have anybody, so it's a sharing of information, again, trying to get to that goalpost together, because I feel like unified, we can make a difference. So we will absolutely share that information. We're looking at, state and federal right now. And we know that some of these bills are going to kind of waffle in between both. We're new at this, that's not necessarily our expertise in our lane. It just came out of necessity. The only way that we could truly help, law enforcement get to the end arena where they wanted to go was to push this forward for them, because they were, we heard so many complaints, and we knew how frustrated they were. And it's frustrating for us because, we hear the media beat them up, everything from Border Patrol to state agencies to local municipalities. And it breaks my heart because, a lot of these are mothers and fathers that have children, and they don't want to see this any more than we do.
Okay, well, I'm happy to help too. If you have a group of folks who have some legislative experience, I'm happy to help. help as you guys sort through that. And I think the sharing of information and best practices is just very important and critical that you do it. But let's talk about policy failures. So a child comes to the border with promises of a better life one way or another, and she's put into the detention center. And what happens there? What happens when she's there? I understand people are showing up claiming sponsorship, and that's the trafficking is beginning right then and there in our own U.S. facilities. Is that true?
We don't claim to be experts at the border. We're careful to stay in our lane. What I can tell you from the cases that we've worked is, we have situations where we might say hypothetically have 58 girls. But we can only identify 42 because the others did not cross through the border facilities. So we don't have the digital footprint on who they really are. That's not uncommon. And, if you have an open border, you're not processing these kids properly. We don't know if the people that are saying that they are their parents are really their parents. We had a situation with a pregnant girl that was 12 that was trafficked, and supposedly the person that brought her in to the hospital said they were a relative, which of course we doubt, but that person also tried to sell this girl while he was at the hospital. So this is the reality of how sad things are with an open border. It's out of control. You're going to have victims. You have kids that are here that don't speak the language. They don't know their surroundings. They don't know where they're at. One of our greatest heroes is Tara Rodas. She's a whistleblower, and she's got guts. She brought to light the fact that these kids are being passed off to sponsors that were organized crime. And it really pulled back the veil on a lot of things that are happening. And, it's here in Texas. I'm sure it's in other places too. But, we were getting the brunt of it. And when kids were being placed into homes that weren't being vetted, and those homes were actually, riddled with organized crime members, that can speak to process. We haven't seen it from our end. In that perspective, we can only tell you what we see in the rings. But I can tell you that when they're not passing through Border Patrol and we don't have a digital footprint, that tells you a lot.
Well, just to point out, the porous border is a problem for a lot of reasons, extremely serious problem for us. And I think we're beginning to wake up more and more and more. This is just one more facet of the dangers that we face with that porous border. And whether it's human trafficking, drug smuggling, terrorists coming in, whatever it is, hopefully we're going to get serious about this. But I understand that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has a small little office called the Office on Trafficking in Persons. And I understand that they have a mission to help survivors of sex and labor trafficking to rebuild their lives and become self-sufficient, and that they can get a child eligibility letter, which allows them to get some benefits and some support. Is that enough? Are we doing enough there? What does happen once, and I know it's not necessarily in your portfolio here of work, but I know these answers. What happens to these trafficked people? Are they just going to fall through the cracks for the rest of their lives, or are they truly saved?
The answer is I don't think we know. I don't think we know what's going to happen to them or what their future is. I have to say this, when we're dealing with someone that's 12 or 13 years old, that's pregnant, that's been trafficked, a lot of the damage has been done. I mean, you've really impacted a life. And I think for me, one of the most heartbreaking things is to hear certain entities, and I won't go into it, but to say that as an NGO you should be dealing with domestics only. That's heartbreaking when I'm looking at the numbers and I'm seeing what's in front of me. And when you have real touch on that, with law enforcement and taking these cases down and seeing cases go to prosecution, to say that you only need to be dealing with domestics, so these people don't matter. And when you don't have minor sex trafficking safe houses dedicated to migrants, that's an issue. And one of the things that we tried to promote and ask for in the very beginning through several different, we'll just say government entities, is we wanted emergency shelters. And we wanted emergency shelters to be all across the state. And we were hoping that it would, spread like wildfire across the U.S. And what that emergency shelter would do is give law enforcement the opportunity to get back out on the road. And these kids would have the ability to have established a medical and digital footprint. And you would have a SANE nurse, which is a sex assault nurse expert, forensic interviewer. And even if they were only there at that shelter for, say, 48 hours to 72 hours, we would at least know who they were by this piece of data and where they were going from that point on. And I think that's a piece that's been missing. So we get these kids that come across the border with these pieces of paper with numbers on it, and they're supposed to call the number and this is where they're supposed to go. Once that happens, where's the traceability on that? Who's following up? When you have reported 300,000 missing kids, I can tell you that it's probably at least twice that. So that's a number that they've been volleying around now for the past 2 years. Well, we all know that more kids have come through since then.
So it seems to me, with some serious effort on the federal government's level and the administration, State Department, have they tried to work with foreign countries? Of course, Mexico comes to mind immediately, Venezuela, the many, but in building shelters so we can repatriate victims, but building shelters in their own countries, because I'm hearing you this disconnect between, well, these kids are being trafficked over the border, and because it's a border issue, we shouldn't care. I just don't think that that's acceptable as human beings, that we allow children to be trafficked and we turn our back on them. But I think step one is to admit there's a problem. Step two is to get some creative thinking here and some collaboration with these other countries on perhaps building some shelters there. Maybe that's
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, if we had the ability to have emergency shelters here, I mean, my biggest thing is looking at the reunification of these kids back to their parents and their countries. Now, I've heard a lot of people talk about, oh my gosh, how could you let your kid go across? That's not how this happens. If you've ever visited third world countries and you've ever been in environments where you have, the street urchins, I guess is the common word I hear, kids going around and panhandling and getting the tourists to buy them dinners and things like that. You're dealing with people who are very, very poor, that have, an average size of maybe 3, 5, 6 kids. And this is how they feed their children. I mean, their kids go out and get fed by the tourists. So if you're being promised that your child is going to go ahead of you and that they're going to have the promised land, and then, then they disappear. And how do you find them if you're living in a third world country? If we had the ability here to have an emergency shelter process that we could, work with these other countries to help on a reunification, because guess what? Once they leave that emergency shelter, you're going to know where they're going. And by God, they better be there, or they better have traceability on them. No more of this, throwing your hands up in the air. We don't know where they're at. That's not acceptable. How do you lose 300,000 kids? I mean, if you lost a school bus of American kids, they would be all endangered. Every single law enforcement agency in the United States would be notified of this, and we'd all be looking for them. But when it comes to 300,000 missing kids from other countries, I hear them complain about it, but what is your solution? I mean, I'm going to raise my hand because Shepherd's Watch is a solution-based group. You can complain about it all day long, but that's not going to get people... that's not going to get closure. That's not going to get people to safety. So you could talk about the problem to me, but there goes the engineer mind. I want the solution, and I want to know how quick you're going to deliver that, and what's your plan of execution.
You and I think alike there. I would say to people, as a former lawmaker, it's like, fine, bring me the problem, but bring me the solution too. You can't just dump a problem on somebody's lap and expect it to necessarily get solved. But the failures here, and get the kids in and shove them out into the American, life regardless of the consequences, I think has been the policy. But Lisa, how can people help? Do you have on the website, can people go and say I have certain talents and maybe I can donate some time? Or certainly I know you have a donate button, and that's shepherdswatchfoundation.org. But how can people, what's the best thing they can do to be helpful for your cause?
Well, I think it's our cause. I mean, I think that, how we have to look at this is that these are all our children. And, these are our kids of tomorrow. So whether it's a domestic kid or a migrant kid, that could be your next heart surgeon. That could be your next school teacher. That could be the person taking care of a family member, or someone that is at a very high level of intelligence in your country. So I think it's our problem. I think people need to look at what programs do they have in their area? What legislation do they have in their area? If they want to work with Shepherd's Watch as basically being an ambassador, or help us, on this legislative, front, this task force of putting together laws that will help law enforcement do their job, help district attorneys implement, and start putting a good punt on this, because we're behind in legislation. We're behind in the movement. When you look at narcotics, we're so much further ahead in how to tackle the problem than we are, sex trafficking, human trafficking. So, we're looking for people that are out there that are everyday people that have the ability to make a change. And, if you're looking to be boots on ground in your area, well, we can possibly find a group that, has a lot of the same attributes that we do, or you can work with us. It's just that we want everybody to have the realization, though, that it's here. It's not going anywhere. It's not slowing down. It's not stopping where we're at. We've seen an increase more than a decrease, to be honest. That's the sad part. You would have thought that this would have slowed down, but it's not. It's picked up. Our ads have picked up. Right now, we're looking at about, if we just put Dallas on the map, we're looking at between 1,500 and 1,600 ads every day. We're looking at over 15,000 a week, and that's just for Dallas.
That is just mind-blowing. I know that it was said by the Homeland Security Investigations Special Agent in Charge, Mark Dawson, that human trafficking as a whole is one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the U.S. So to drive home your point here that this is just getting worse. And again, if we don't go after the bad guys and stop them entirely, whatever they're trafficking, I mean, shame on us. This is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So the task is ahead of us. I think federal legislation, I think law enforcement being given the assets that they need. But Lisa, for people like you, my hat's off. I can't imagine. I can imagine you have some pretty bad days, but do you have some good days too?
Every day's a good day. Look, there are times when you have to put your head down, and you have to rely on your faith, and you have to have straight eyes, and you have to realize that there might be that one case that's a stinger. It'll be your forever motivator. It'll be a reminder to you of how dark this world is. But when you're throwing light and you know that you're making a difference, sometimes it's a little bit different than the stories you hear where they're talking about kicking indoors. I mean, that's not a reality. Law enforcement kicks indoors in the U.S. But, and you know where I'm going with that. I mean, you have no jurisdiction to do that. So that's not even a reality. But I think it's all going to be about how you view it. I mean, your success rate is when you have cases that go to prosecution, and you let that carry you through the times where you have your gotaways, and you hope and pray that they come back up on your radar. We've had girls that have disappeared, that have been hard to locate, and we've had girls that have disappeared that we have not located. So that's going to be what you would consider maybe a bad day. But when I see the good people, and I see these guys out there giving it their all, and they're giving everything they can, whether it's a first responder, paramedic, fireman, people that are working in real estate, people that are working in hospitals, trauma nurses, pregnancy centers. These are everyday heroes aside from law enforcement that are out there busting it, and they're dealing with this topic. And, nobody's really checking in on these guys. We are. We're like, hey, are you guys okay? But nobody's really checking in on them because they are dealing with it as well. And I think that that's really important as a community to go back in and talk to those people and say, what can we do to support you? What can we do to help you? What would make a difference in your life if we could do something to help you with the trafficking cases that you see? And give them that ear, give them that shoulder, because their job is hard enough. But then when you tie their hands with a migrant child that comes in that's pregnant and they don't know what to do and they don't know who to call because you can't call CPS or you don't have a migrant, minor sex trafficking safe house to take them to, that's the change that we need to make. And that's where I implore everybody in every state, in every community to reach out and start thinking of a system so that these guys can go back to doing the very important job that they have to do and not deal with this, I don't want to say side effect, but it's an indirect blow from an open border, and we're dealing with it, and we got to make change.
Well, Lisa, you are going to make change, and I want to thank you so much and say that Sagely Speaking is happy to be a partner with you and support you and continue to follow you. And if there's anything we can do to help spread the word, the important word, you are doing God's work. And it takes a certain very special kind of person to do that. So my hat's off to you. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I just really wanted to thank you so much for joining us here on Sagely Speaking.
Well, thank you very much. We'll be happy to come back anytime and, talk to us in 3 months. Things may have changed again and we may have even more information or better intel. We will definitely be contacting you to give you our legislative initiatives so that maybe you can give us some insight to that. Because again, I don't want to say we don't know what we're doing, but we don't know what we're doing. We don't write bills. We just know that we have 10 that need to get out there. And this is an echo chamber for people working these cases, frontline responders and law enforcement, and we want to make a better life for them as well because they're hands-on and they're giving it their all, and we want to help everybody in our community get there.
Well, that's great. And please come back in 3 months and let's follow up on next steps and what legislation is out there and get going on that. So again, Lisa, thank you very much for what you do and for joining us today. And I want to thank our sponsors for sponsoring Sagely Speaking, for without you, we could not do what we do. And most of all, I want to thank you for listening. It's because of you that I'm here saying these words and trying to shed light on interesting topics and things that truly matter. So until we talk again on another episode, be well.